by introducing myself. My name is Susanna Mills. I'm the editor-in-chief of the American Philatelist and the Philatelic Literature Review, in addition to a couple other publications and various items at the APS. And with us here today, we have David Beach. Raise your hand, David. All right, David is joining us from London. David has had a long career in philately. He's worked as an expert for H.R. Harmer. He spent 30 years as the curator of the British Library's Philatelic collections, and he was a Royal Philatelic Society London Fellow and President. In 2013, David was awarded the Smithsonian Institution's Philatelic Achievement Award. We're also joined by Ken Tretton, who's joining us from Iowa. Ken's done it all in the hobby. He is an award-winning exhibitor, researcher, writer, editor, a Philatelic judge, and a Philatelic literature judge, and a society officer. He's been the editor of the American Revenuer and the Congress books. In 2015, Ken received the Charles Peterson Philatelic Literature Life Achievement Award from the APS for his contributions to the world of Philatelic literature. He continues to do editing and pre-press work on various projects, such as the North Atlantic Non-Contract Steamship Sailings book that was published 3 years ago at this point by John Barwis and Dick Winter, who unfortunately passed away recently. All right, also on our panel, we have Anthony Bard. Tony is joining us from West Sussex, and he is an award-winning author and exhibitor. He is the current editor of First Days, The Posthorn, Korean Philately, The Mayflower, and The London Philatelist. And then finally, we have Chip Gleedman, who's joining us from Connecticut. Chip serves the U.S. Philatelic Classic Society as its 1861 section editor, and he is the assistant editor of the Chronicle. Chip has been named Michael Lawrence's successor for the prestigious publication once Michael decides to retire. All right, so here's our panel. Thank you to the panelists and the viewers who are joining us this afternoon. This discussion is sponsored by the American Philatelic Research Library and its publication, the Philatelic Literature Review. Essentially, we're doing this discussion series where we talk about topics that are important to Philatelic literature, Philatelic research, a wide range of topics. So if you have ideas for things you'd like to see in the future, please let me know. So this will be republished in the Philatelic Literature Review, and it'll also be on YouTube at a later point. So before we get started, I'll just share a few thoughts so you understand where we're coming from with the topic of peer review. So obviously, in the scientific and academic communities, peer review is the process in which experts in a discipline evaluate the quality and credibility of their peers' research and whether it's suitable for publication. It's one of these foundations of research that ensures that there's integrity in the academic and professional settings. It's really essential to have objectivity and rigor in peer review, and a failure to uphold the agreed upon standards can be devastating not only to authors and publications, but to the field at large. Those standards of peer review vary by discipline. Some of the most common include avoiding conflicts of interest, maintaining anonymity of the authors and the reviewers, and monitoring the performance of peer reviewers to see whether they're actually being helpful. So obviously, philately isn't subject to the strict standards of scientific and academic communities, and we don't currently have established guidelines across the field for peer review. Publications that officially conduct peer review are few and far between, but we have here today some representatives from those publications who have that background. So with the understanding that the rigor of scientific or academic peer review that many of you may be familiar with from your careers, the understanding that that's probably beyond our reach, we'll be discussing what peer review means in the hobby. And finally, a disclaimer before we get started. With this topic, it's inevitable that you will think of specific situations, names of authors and publications, and other personal details related to peer review. This discussion isn't the venue to hash out disagreements or point fingers, so I'd ask that participants and viewers make an effort to keep their references to specific experiences anonymous unless the example is historic and the involved parties are no longer with us. Thank you for listening to my spiel. All right, let's get started by just defining what peer review in philately looks like, and talking a little bit about what role peer review plays in your individual publications and your background. David?
Well, for me, peer review is the golden rule of peer review is that whatever is written in Philately is there for all time. At the point of publication, and the book, if it's a printed book, certainly, and articles will be in a library or in people's shelves forever. So it's important to get it right. People in the future will judge what people have to say. So getting it right at the outset is enormously important, because unlike an exhibit of stamps or postal history, where you can have another go at trying to win your points and your medal, most people only write the book once, and they might have spent 20, 30 years studying a subject. Why get it wrong? And a peer reviewer really is the best friend of any author.
Ken, do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, I guess that either with the American Revenuer or with the Congress book, I did not make it a general practice to do peer review. For the most part, I relied upon my knowledge of the authors and also the subject, so that when someone writes an article, say for the American Revenuer, about the historical background of some usage of a revenue stamp, I looked at what did the author do to gather the information, and also the fact, who else is there that could review it? And oftentimes there is no one who is going to know about the history of some small medicine manufacturer that used private die stamps. And so there's no one to do peer review. In other instances, there was several instances where I asked someone to do peer review, and they had already done what someone here commented was pre-peer review, that they had already seen the article. The author had submitted it to them before they submitted it for publication. So in that case, my peer reviewer had already seen it and submitted comments to the author.
Chip, do you want to share?
Well, I actually am in an enviable position because the publication I work with, the Chronicle of the U.S. Philatelic Classic Society, we have, in a sense, both a built-in and a non-built-in peer review process. We are fortunate to have section editors for each of the various time periods of early U.S. philately, the pre-stamp, the 1847, 50s, 60s, and on up till the turn of the 20th century. And the section editors are eminent people in their fields. So each section editor, in a sense, is doing peer review as they, receive and work with individual authors. Above that, we have Michael Lawrence, who is both, a 50, 60, 80-year philatelist, exhibitor, author, and everything else, as well as a giant in the world of publishing of this type of material. So that is built into our structure. But I will say that periodically we do get articles that just make you do that golden retriever kind of cock of the head. And we do send it around. We do say, does this make sense? Sometimes we publish them. Sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we choose not to go down that and we tell them to send it to the London Philatelist.
Thanks, Chip.
That was absolutely a joke. But so we have that built in, and then we have, in addition to that, a pool of people we can consult with before making, any type of publish or no publish decision. So that's on our, I think, in our favor.
All right, and Tony?
Yeah, I'm very envious of Chip's colleagues and setup. Because of the sort of breadth of article topics that, especially in something like the London Philatelist, I'm publishing, there are a range, as has already been said. There are some which are pretty straightforward in terms of either what they are covering or what they are, what points, the key points that are being made in the course of the article. I try and apply what I was told when I took the role by the late Frank Walton, which is the sniff test. And the first sniff is really looking at the references, right? If an article is on the surface properly referenced, then I have a problem because it's not a problem, but I love checking up references, especially if it's on a topic which, as in quite a lot of them, I know absolutely nothing about. But if I can get positive a positive feel from just checking up some of the available references, and the topic itself is not of any major I think in the word, it begins with a confrontational or controversial. Yeah. And then I would probably not be looking to get peer review. Yeah. If there is a particular take, let's say, on a very well researched and well collected area, and that can obviously be within Great Britain, it could be within the US or Asian or whatever, then I think my first stage would be to look at the acknowledgements and to see if there are any key players that I recognize, and then presume that they actually did get involved. And if they are from people I've never heard of, then the first thing I would do is go to members of the society, right, who are known for having some broad experience in the particular topics. Does not happen very often, I have to say. Whether that's a function of having to produce 10 issues a year, as opposed to, what I sometimes dream about, which is 4, where we could actually sort of, go through it in a lot more detail. But it is what it is, yeah. And I think that in the 5.5 years or whatever it is that I've been editing the LP, there probably have been only about a dozen articles which I have felt are taking a position which doesn't seem to be to go with the conventional wisdom. Now, that's not always a bad thing, because if it was, then we'd never actually get new results. Yeah. And so if someone has done the work and has come up with a conclusion which is slightly at odds with what has been the conventional wisdom up until that point, then I just want, and you know, it can be fantastically well researched with all the right names. I just want, for my own peace of mind, to go to try and find somebody who could look at it outside of the people who have been, you know, actually utilized. Now, quite often, what comes back is that they say, well, look who he's consulted. You know, it's got to be right, which is very nice. And as David would always say, as long as the references, as long as everything that is stated has been backed up with references, right? Or having the scans, having the evidence in front of you within the actual publication, then that's going to have to do. And then you wait for somebody to come back and potentially disagree, or amplify, or add a bit of information. And as we were saying before, the problem is you've got to get the people who maybe feel that way to actually put finger to keyboard and tell you. But yeah, that's generally my view. And there are times, I mean, you know, in my own collecting area, you know, up until 1980 or whatever it was, there was a conventional wisdom about the values on the circular stamps of Jammu and Kashmir, which was wrong. I mean, the articles from the likes of David Masson, who was, if you like, the father of Kashmiri philately, always quoted the wrong values for the circular stamps. I got Gibbons to change or rather to correct the values, but I never actually wrote an article to back that up, because I didn't have to. I had the evidence, presented it to the catalogue people, and they essentially overturned 100 years of what was believed to be accurate, which is fine. You know, I think that sort of thing is exciting in its own philatelic way. But it doesn't happen very often, and I'm sure there are plenty more things that are sitting there and being treated as, especially if you like, in the more niche areas, that are treated as gospel, which with a little bit of lateral thinking sometimes could be shown to possibly be not as correct as they're taken to be. But yeah, so that's my fluid view of peer reviewing. Yeah.
Well, and Tony, you brought us very nicely to the next topic, which is talking a little bit about some historical examples of peer review within Philately.
Well, I'll jump in. You know, I in my view, peer review is completely embedded in this hobby. We're doing it constantly. Exhibitors, in essence, get peer review every time they put an exhibit up. Anything that's sent to an expert committee is by definition getting peer review. Articles get peer review. The catalogs are, you know, we submit something to a catalog, they review it, they publish it. That becomes the canon for the next period of time until somebody submits something else to a catalog. So the catalogs are doing peer review that set a standard for all of us in our publishing and our exhibiting and our whatever. So while it may not be scientific, we have a long tradition of peer review in virtually everything we do in this hobby. So I think that, you know, in a sense, even though we talk about it not being rigorous or not being formalized, it's pervasive. And I think that actually is something that helps all of us out, that we do require expert opinions and peer review for any statement about the authenticity of something. We require some form of review of anything that's written or makes it into the catalog or anything else. So yes, it's already there. And if we keep using it, I think it will keep the hobby strong. And the good news is it's a hobby. So people are not making life or death decisions based on our published research the way they would be in a scientific publication or a medical trial or a drug trial. We're putting stamps in books. It's a little less, there may be money involved, but it's a little less life and death.
I would make some comments about probably literature in general, and that it goes back probably about 30 years ago. A good friend and fellow revenue philatelist, Dr. Richard Riley, was doing a bibliography of revenue articles that appeared in philatelic literature. And so doing, he would go back to, if he could find it, the beginning of a run of some publication that ran from, say, the 1880s to 1900. And he would page these journals. And so he did it all the way up into the 1990s, which was the current. And he told me once, he says, he says, anything written before about 1950 is really pretty atrocious. And he says, there's exceptions. There's exceptions. There are some good writers that go back into the mid 1890s and some journals that go back to the 19 teens and 20s. But he said even the good journals, even the good journals are full of really bad writing. He says that it wasn't till mid 20th century or later that people began to use references at the end of their article. A lot of the articles are, here's something I saw, show and tell time. There's a lot of journals that were nothing but show and tell. So I think we've got to be a little aware of the fallibility of some references, that someone could come up with a nice long reference list and everything in it is written well over 100 years ago. And really back then it was more, I've got to fill the space, or I want to write an article, rather than I want to be accurate and we want to present the true facts.
Yeah, and actually, Ken, let me just say, I agree with you, and everything, I didn't mean to say everything was completely rosy. I have 2 books of fancy cancellations, only one of which would I trust. I have, 2 books on the same stamp, one of which is full of bad information. The discussion boards I'm part of have torn apart 2 very recent publications, 2 books that have won awards.
Wow.
That at some point they managed to make it through with what the peers, in quotes, have now deemed to be, not necessarily right information. So yes, there still is room for improvement, and obviously going back, it's even worse the farther back you go. Yeah.
Yeah, technology nowadays is probably making it worse, because all you have to do is write a book and send it off to Amazon, and all of a sudden it's published. And I've seen books come out through Amazon, through Lulu, through Blurb, and no one other than the author ever saw the book before it was made available to the public.
Chip, I'm intrigued as well, is that in this post-publication review of these recent titles, these award-winning titles, was there anything published to rebut?
Not yet, and you know, to take Suzanne's comment, I'd rather not mention the specific.
No, I'm not
year.
asking you to, but it is very valid, is because you know, yeah, once something's published, then it's
Well,
gospel.
and then to be given the, you know, the best whatever or grand something or other.
Yeah, just
it gives
underlined
it an extra bit of credibility.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so, you know, it still happens. There still is room for improvement. You know, it's in terms of peer review, picking the right peers is sometimes as important as the peer review itself.
Sure. I think that the quality of research has improved greatly, especially since 1950. I think education and understanding has improved. Whenever I'm looking at a book manuscript, one of the first questions or things I do is look at the acknowledgements. And this tells you where the person has been. And sometimes, even if you don't have a great deal of knowledge of the area concerned, you ask a few pertinent questions that goes beyond that I've got an example of this or an example of that, and it's a show and tell. If and there's a good example in the revenue world where a book on a South American revenue subject has appeared in recent years. And my first question in looking at this was, has anyone looked to see whether there is an archive? And it's not knowing about the subject, it's knowing about what might exist. So if there is an issue of revenue stamp for a South American country, there's got to be some kind of process by which the taxation, for example, is instigated, an act of parliament or legislature. There will be regulations and there will be an archive. There will be a taxing authority that may have an archive. Has that been examined? There will be printers with archives, designers, operational departments. Now, if a book fails to have those sorts of things, then obviously it depends on the scope and the nature of the book. But it is a bit of a telltale feature. Perhaps the reviewer will write, for further studies in this area, these archives, whether they exist or not, may be known or not, should be examined.
Tony, you mentioned a sniff test, and a few other people have mentioned like a sniff test, a smell test that helps you determine when peer review might be necessary. Is that something you all kind of agree with? You've mentioned looking at acknowledgements as another way to determine whether peer review might be necessary. What other things do you look for?
Other things you might look for are a chronology in a book, maps. If it's a slightly obscure subject or a subject that's akin to philately or context philately, a glossary. The things that really make the book work for the user.
Another thing might be who is the author?
Mhm.
So if we have a book on a given subject, is the author noted for over a period of years to have been writing on this subject, to have been collecting and exhibiting this subject, and has his exhibit evolved over a period of time so that this, say a book is the culmination of many years of public exposure, or is it a book that appears out of nowhere, written by someone who, even in the specialist group, has rarely heard of the individual. They haven't exhibited, or they exhibited once 2 years ago, and now they've got a book. So this has some bearing on how well you can trust what this person is saying. And also, are they just bringing together research that was done by others and things that they've discovered in their exhibiting? Or is it come up with a completely new, never before discussed aspect of the subject?
So what are the factors that you consider when you're choosing an expert to be a peer reviewer? And obviously we've mentioned it a few times already, but there are also challenges such as, what if there's only one other expert? You pretty much know then who you're going to talk to. But generally, let's assume more than one expert available. How do you make that decision?
Sometimes I have asked people that I know that are familiar with the field, say aerophilately, someone who is knowledgeable in aerophilately, but not necessarily an expert in the field that this article is. And I ask them to recommend someone.
I think you have to sort of put out feelers.
Yeah.
And if they're not in the acknowledgements, then you just have to see eventually where your attempts to find the right person or persons ends up, and there will be a common denominator eventually. Most certainly, yeah. I have sought out suggestions from people who I know have got an interest of whatever depth in a particular article's topic, even down to saying, well, look, if you were going to get a peer reviewer, who would it be? Simple as that. Or who's done the work? Yeah, that's really the only way. Yeah, I believe. Unless you're a specialized society. I think if you're a specialized society, then it's somewhat easier. Yeah, because you've got them at your fingertips almost.
Well, one of the things that we'd sort of begun to talk about amongst ourselves was the notion of financial interest. And it's funny because a lot of times the peer review, the authors, the owners of something, the exhibitors of something, the people who will be reviewing something end up with a financial interest in it.
Mm.
So, one of, you mentioned, Stanley Pillar used to be my local stamp dealer, was also an author and an expert on a number of topics, wrote a number of books. on the New York Postmaster Provisional. But if you saw Stanley at a show, he would show you this cover and talk about the most outrageous scenario for how this particular item got transported by camel across the Himalayas to justify the rate on it. And therefore, it's worth all this money. Now, it's one thing when you know Stanley, and but if he was to write that down, I would just throw it back at him and go, "You're nuts." So even in the same expert, you can have both brilliant work and outlandish thinking. And you know, and Ken, you're a judge. You tell us as exhibitors to write an article. Don't write it in the frames, write an article. So I write the article, and therefore now I'm, you know, does that make what I said in there right? And obviously I own the material if I'm exhibiting it, writing about it. So I have a financial interest in trying to convince other people that this is something rare, important, or whatever. And if, you know, the person who knows the most about it happens to be an auctioneer, well, they're going to want to say, yes, it's real, because obviously they might have a shot at selling it and making a few ducats off of its eventual sale. So it's a twisted web of both getting the peer review and respecting the peer review and ensuring it's actually a review. But we try our best. So, you know, that's what it really comes down to, is we all, I think, try our best.
Yeah, you're you're depending on the bona fides of the author, which we have to, you know, in general. Yeah.
I don't think we should ever be shy of the research process of publishing something which may be a little bit contentious, which may not be provable, which is flying a kite. And then the next stage is that someone disagrees and they write in. And that should always be encouraged, because across time, the truth will emerge. And I really can't see much of a shortcut, short of definite evidence in document form, that's ever going to get around that.
Of course, you know, the problem with a lot of areas that people collect is that lack of documentation, you know, or lack of access to that documentation. So again, it's sort of my own area, which is certain aspects of Korean philately. Firstly, I'm never going to go to Pyongyang. Right. I know that there was the whole story from previous authors had been, well, you know, everything in North Korea was that had anything to do with the postal system was destroyed during the Korean War, and that was the accepted wisdom. Except if you go to the Pyongyang Stamp Museum, or if you could take a camera with you, which apparently you can't anymore, but I have seen photos of what they got on the walls, and there are the documents, and the rest of the documents are behind the doors, but you aren't going to get to see them. And so the only thing you can do is you have to access the first-hand evidence in terms of the material, which is somewhat complicated with the actual stamps, slightly broader with the actual postal history, because there is a reasonable amount around, and there are documents in various parts, certainly in the National Archives in the US, which was 1 million documents of which was very conveniently copied by the South Korean National Museum and available online. But there's so much more we don't know about rate changes. When do they happen? Well, you can only assess that on the basis of the evidence that's currently available. You can't go to, you know, if you're a collector of GB postal history or US postal history, any sort of level, or a level of specialization, and many other countries, you can go and you can actually find pretty much, there you go, there's the magic bullet. That rate changed on that particular day, right? plenty of other countries where that information, that documented information, is just not available. And that's the fun. I mean, that is ultimately the fun. So it can be an ever-changing landscape, because you've been collecting for X years and you've sort of looked at hundreds of covers, and therefore this is when that rate came in as far as you're concerned. Then bang, something turns up at auction or in someone else's collection that you didn't even know they had it, which basically turns everything you said on its head, which is a factor in certain aspects of Korean philately anyway. But that's great. It's fine. But as long as you're sort of being honest, as long as you put forward, this is what I have, this is what I have, this is what I've seen, this is what has come up at auction before, this is the paltry documentary evidence that exists out there, therefore X could equal Y, or X could even equal X squared. That's all you can do until something else comes along and proves you right or wrong. And that's the bit of philately I really like. It's that you hope that someone will actually get involved, which is the other dream. But we can't have everything. We can have the fun of actually trying to come up with theories. We can have the excitement of discovering, as I did, about 18 months ago, having tried to research POW mail, for which I think I'd found about 12 documents. I found over 1,000 pages in the British archives about POW mail. Now, unfortunately, it was only for 1 year out of the 2.5 when it was actually documented. But hey, I'll take whatever you like. And that didn't necessarily change everything that had gone before. It just amplified the sort of the background to it and made certain things fall into place. And that to me is the joy of the research, the obsessive collecting, the hobby that we all get involved in. We all,
I think another aspect of peer review is I see a comment in the chat that should we have peer review for every philatelic research article? I think we could say this would be an ideal, but we have to be realistic. And the vast majority of philatelic journals, the editors are placing little notes that the cupboard is bare, I need your article. And the article comes days before the material has to be sent to the printer. And that means you have to get the pages laid out, get the advertisements juggled around to make the article fit. And it isn't always possible. Then I think we also got to look at the fact that with many specialized journals, the editor themselves is a very knowledgeable person in this area, and that they take the article, they read it, they look at it, and we'll go to the Chronicle, where Chip is knowledgeable in his area, and it goes to Michael Lawrence, who is extremely well-versed in the area of classic US material. In a sense, the editor themselves are peer reviewing.
Yeah.
I don't know that we would be well served by publishing the names of the peer reviewers. That could lead to the fact that Oh, I don't want to say anything because the author's a good friend. I don't want my name associated with opposing their idea, but uh, peer review, it's something that as editors we all do.
Well, I think in general it should be an anonymous process. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's occasionally it hasn't been, but that's on the basis of ridiculous responses from the person who's had their article reviewed. And then you have to sort of back it up by saying, well, I haven't just plucked this person out of the air. This guy knows, this peer reviewer knows his stuff, and this is who it is. Certainly, I think that it's not a bad idea to present the article for peer review without the author's name showing, because then you potentially get around this situation where I don't want to upset a friend or whatever. So
Hasn't there also been threats of litigation?
Probably.
When somebody provides some article about some item that they have a financial interest in, and it is turned down, or it's whatever, or somebody comes up with a different something. I believe I've heard of various organizations, whether it's an expert committee or a publication, being threatened with litigation,
expertization.
with a different opinion.
Expertization has been a source of that, as David well knows. Because as you say, you think you've got something worth, big money, right? And all the people around you tell you it's worth big money, and then wallop. You get the expert committee coming back and saying, we don't actually agree. It's it's worth nothing. So that can generate activity, let's say.
And then an article about the item. There's been a lot of ink spent on some items and whether they're, and the documentation that was published in various things, whether that actually holds up to scrutiny. And actually, it's interesting. I also was looking at the chat, the notion of scientific review. There's a lot of pseudoscience in philately. Looking at things under all kinds of high-powered microscopes to determine which ink is on top of which other ink, which basically you cannot determine because of the viscosity of inks and how it flows around and whatever, and whether one's oil-based or water-based. But if you look at it, and if you look at this third generation scan on the internet, it's clear that the red ink is above the black ink, or the black ink is above the black ink. And using this scanning electron microscope, we can obviously see that, whether we can see it or not. Paper fibers, spectrums of inks, whether they actually mean anything or not. They mean something, but we don't yet know what they mean. So there's a lot of pseudoscientific work and a lot of scientific work that will eventually filter into the review of conclusions. But how much do we have to rely on it today? These are people who were making paper and printing stamps on that paper by candlelight.
Very true. Yeah. Well, certainly David's the expert on the analytical philately area, which is, that's just an area where I have to temper what I publish because
it's an important area.
Absolutely, it's just a question of if your publication is for a broad-based group of collectors, then it has to be digestible. Okay, and that's sometimes a big difficulty,
I think one of the problems is that of understanding what's going on. It's a bit like dealing with conservators of philatelic material. you have to know something about the conservation techniques, and the conservator has to know about the philately to get the right answer. It's the same with the science. So therefore you have a dialogue. I was privileged to work with Professor Robin Clark of University College London. And one of the first things we did was look at the Grinnells, and some of them came across with one of the owning families, and we did a Raman test on the Grinnells, the inks, the paper brighteners, and we did the same with the copies in the Taplin collection, which are regarded as genuine, being careful to avoid the areas that have been repaired, of course. And we've discovered on that occasion, 25 years ago, that the inks were the same substances. Had they been made of different substances, or substances that had only been devised in the 1890s, then we would have immediately said the Grinnells can't be real. So science has its place, but one has to understand what it means. In recent times, there has been a trend for just pointing the gun of science, Raman or XRF, at materials and just saying it's made of X. It doesn't seem to lead anywhere. It's pure science, not particularly something that you can publish, because it doesn't really lead anywhere or tell you anything. And I think this is where it feeds into expertization, where scientific results, if properly understood, can be of enormous value.
It can be, but as you said, the inks on the Grinnells doesn't prove they're real. It just does not automatically disqualify them.
Exactly right. That was my amazing discovery when we did this work with Professor Robin Clark, because I was expecting them to be made of something much, much more modern. And the big surprise was, no, it's the same substances. And that's why the 52 copies came to London and the expertising process took place. So it's knowing how to treat the science, which I think is the important thing.
That was the point I was trying to make.
Indeed.
And in my area, the 1860 US issues, there's a 1-cent blue stamp that has 3 catalog listings. And the spectra analysis of those inks, it's the exact same ink. It's just how much lead they put in that particular day, in that particular summer, winter, whether the candle was bright or not. And then you go to the 3-cent issue, and there's 42 varieties of pink, pigeon blood pink, which I've never seen pigeon blood. So, but you know, and actually you can have pigeon blood ink that becomes non-pigeon blood pink, and it by different days they fade, and things that previously were one color are now a different color.
Absolutely.
Does that mean they're a different stamp? Well, according to the catalog, it means it's a different stamp. Yeah, so there's a lot that it can tell us that both helps us and hurts us in some of these discussions. It makes things clearer and it makes things muddier. But it's yet another tool.
All right, so we have a Q&A. How would an author go about getting an expert to review their book? What resources are available to help? So I'm assuming this is in response to, so if your publisher is not going to be doing a peer review themselves, how might you find someone who can help with the pre-publication peer review?
One thing I would say is it's not up to the author to get peer review. It's up to the editor. And I think we probably all heard the comment about that anyone who has themselves as a lawyer has a fool for a client. And I could say almost the same thing about any author who does not have an editor. And the editor can look at the book from a different set of eyes. The editor would find a peer reviewer. The editor can even find the publisher or the printer, the book manufacturer, whatever you want to call them. But I think a lot of the problems that we were talking about are amplified in self-published books. I see head shaking.
Ken,
Well,
let me,
go ahead.
and I'll just say very simply, as an editor, if somebody said, where do I find a peer reviewer? I would go to whatever journal or is in that particular area and talk to an editor. Number one, the editor would love to have a part of it or a chapter or a summary as an article for their publication, but they would likely also be plugged into a network where they could connect that author who might be writing in isolation with others in the field. So if you're writing about whatever, philately, look and see if there is a specialty publication or a society publication or a society that covers that same area, and make a play towards the editor of that particular journal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Suzanne, I interrupted you. So what were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was, yeah, I don't think self-publishing is going to go away. But I do think that if someone is writing their book entirely in isolation, and has made no colleagues in their specialty field, I mean, it's strange, right?
So
No.
a red flag. I would think I would, if I was reading it and there was insufficient evidence of somebody else actually having been involved or being helped in the creation of the book or the actual article. I would worry, especially if it's a topic I know nothing about, right? And I'm sure certainly with the publications, I mean, David and I are both on the publications committee of the Royal, and basically peer review is now, it has to happen. Unless the author is considered to be the expert in his field and is published, as exhibited where relevant, then he may not get a complete buy, because then you come down to other things, which is, has he actually constructed whatever arguments he's putting together in a logical way that actually makes sense, so yeah, I do agree that you want other people to have been involved, that it's been exposed to other eyes.
So self-publishing itself isn't necessarily the problem, because I should point out that there are not a ton of philatelic book publishers out there that, the APS is only capable of doing, a very few books. And that's the case everywhere. Like, a lack of resources in the societies will often mean that self-publishing is the only feasible option.
And whether we're talking about books or articles, there's a vast amount of self-publishing that goes on, and it's called message boards. I know, David, Tony, I saw you do that, Tony.
Don't.
But the internet is forever.
And the internet is always right.
Somebody putting out a statement about something on a message board without peer review
it's gospel.
That's where I'm going. It may not pass any smell test that's pleasant. But it's out there, and
in my experience, AI just amplifies it, because if
yes.
AI can find it, then it's got to be true. Until the next time you ask the same question, and it's seen something which doesn't doesn't make those previous comments make sense, but it's not self-censoring.
Yeah, if the only thing written about a given topic is a thread on a message board, the search engines, the AI engines, will only have one thing to scrape.
Yeah.
And it will be amplified. And there is obviously, nothing that says that was reviewed by anybody. So we're in the world of self-publishing, whether it's blogs, whether it's message boards, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's whatever it is. More and more content is coming out outside of the formal publishing channels these days than ever before.
I think one needs to be careful about message boards, because as soon as the provider of the website disappears, it disappears too. And there have been other discussions about this. In Britain, the British Library trawls all of the UK domain websites once every 6 months, and other frequencies, if more important, BBC probably hourly. But otherwise, a lot of the stuff is going to be lost. So the importance of material that is peer reviewed is that it is permanent. And at the moment, there's a growing feeling within with the research community that I'm in contact with, is that if you want what you do to survive, you print it on good quality paper, have it well bound, and deposit it in libraries.
And as someone who collects pieces of paper, I am a big fan of having a piece of paper I can hold in my hands.
Paper will last.
So I suppose the next question is then, do we think the hobby would benefit from more outlets with traditional peer review standards? And also, what is our responsibility as editors in this field?
Perhaps we should start saying in articles that have been peer reviewed, a simple statement that says this article has been peer reviewed. And that, to some extent, is setting a rather floppy and loose standard, but it's a good start.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought that would be a good part of a statement, if you like, from whoever is, if it's a society that's publishing a book. I think that should be stated in the foreword or whatever from the actual committee, or whichever entity is actually vetting publications, that peer review is part of the process.
Would you do it with an article?
I would probably do it without necessarily naming the peer reviewer. And although I haven't as yet indicated, I mean, I think if a peer reviewer turns around and says no, it's fine, then there's no real point. I think that if someone is making statements which are different from the conventional wisdom, and that has been looked at and everything is checked out, then I would probably put something at the end that as shocking or whatever, as controversial as this article might be, it has been peer reviewed, and so I'm happy to publish it. I'd like to think that the fact that we do publish in itself an indication that we are pretty confident that as to the accuracy of everything that we publish. which is, well, I suppose, yeah, pretty true. It's pretty true. And I think that most established uh, journals certainly would that would be part of their ethos, is that you're not going to publish something which is blatantly ridiculous unless it's the April 1st issue. But even that can end up being taken as gospel as well. But yeah, I would like to think that people, readers, trust the information that appears in those on those pages, unless somebody comes up and says, well, what you just published is a lot of rubbish, which is fine. Which is fine as long as they can back up their claim. I'm happy to have discourse.
Actually, when we were talking about this, I went back. I'd remembered an old set of articles in the Chronicle where one author said one thing and another author said another thing. And we published both of those right next to each other.
I've done the same thing recently. Yeah. I mean, did it prompt any response from the readership?
It,
No.
it was many years ago, so I don't remember if there was at the time, but it was having to do with dates and where something was, and he said it was like this, and he said it was like that, and so each of them knew that the other one had a different opinion, and they each knew that the articles were coming out. It wasn't that either one was blindsided by it, but it was basically an in-print debate within these two different articles.
I did a similar thing, which was on the topic of some stationery. And one article was a fairly standard approach to trying to resolve a problem, which was based on historical evidence, actual examples of the material, etc., etc., and it came to a conclusion. And another was an in-depth analytical examination of material, which was about 2.5 times as long as the opposite view. And I don't think I got any. The only response I got was, well, I got past the first paragraph of the analytical one and then gave up, which is pretty much what I anticipated, unfortunately. But I couldn't tell you what the conclusion of the analytical article was at all. But I offered the both sides of the same coin, allegedly, and hoped to stimulate a dialogue. How did that go?
Well, you'll get dialogue about it 10 years down the line.
That's it. And the blame.
Oh, you always get the blame.
Yeah.
That they're real quick to deliver.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just goes to show that the last word has never been written on any subject.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We were talking a little bit before the video started about whether authors are a little bit nervous to know that their work is being peer reviewed, and whether knowing that a publication does peer review might turn an author off of trying to publish there.
Not sure why. I'm not sure why it should, unless the author is so entrenched in their views that, as far as they're concerned, they're the only expert, and anybody else who challenges that is not even worthy of consideration. In which case, they probably would withdraw their article, to be honest, because they don't want what they consider will only be criticism and not necessarily helpful criticism. I mean, I write articles, and if the publisher wanted to do a peer review, bring it on. I mean, it's a bit like taking sort of an antique to it would be like the various shows that are around where someone comes in with something that's sort of a Roman coin that hasn't been seen for like 1,000 years, and you say, "I'm just going to call an expert." You happy for me to call an expert? Well, why wouldn't you be? I mean, worst case scenario, it's a fake, but it's going to be a fake wherever you go with it. Best case scenario is, yeah, this is the real thing, and it's well, in that case, it's a financially rewarding. You're going to put yourself up or out there with an article, then I would have thought you want it to be scrutinized and come out with a clean bill of health. Otherwise, who are you fooling?
There's
One of the things I did very frequently at the British Library, and I always found time to talk to researchers, was to say, how do you know that?
Mm.
Where is your evidence?
Mm.
And I think anyone that's researching for a book in the first place or has written something should be absolutely happy for that question to be asked. And if they can come up with a reference and the reference can be checked and it's appropriate, then surely only the truth matters.
I'll throw one little tidbit out. The biggest red flag for me is anything that has the word unique. This is a unique example of, this is the discovery copy and unique. And that is number one, automatically a red flag. So when you find that Roman coin, if it is a design no one has ever seen before, that's instantly a red flag.
Yes. Yeah.
The same thing with a stamp or a cover or provisional something or other or whatever. That is, you better have, all kinds of review and soft evidence to back up that physical item.
A renowned philatelist, a great experience, once put under an item in his collection, unique but not rare.
Yes. Yeah. I have a rock outside that's unique. And it's also very old, which means it must be worth a lot of money. But let me throw the flip side around that, is that one of my roles as an editor is to coax an article out of experts. And I have been known to say, send me your exhibit and I will make an article out of it. The text is all there. The knowledge is all there. They're not authors.
Yeah.
And, and I can do that. Send me your conclusions. Send me your research. Send me just random sentences and paragraphs. And I can stitch them together into an article. So, I almost want to bring the barrier to publishing down rather than raise it up. So I think there has to be a balance. Oh, if you send it to me, I'm going to send it to 14 experts and make sure it's right. Versus publish anything you want, versus let's work together and get this into print and have something that both of us can stand behind.
I think that authors need to understand the purpose of peer review. And peer review is not to tear down their article and show what's wrong with it, but rather to help the author point out anything that might possibly be wrong, something that maybe you need to amplify the reasoning for this decision. And it's like when we have at a stamp show and you're on the jury, and we always used to have, at least in the US, we always had to critique. And critique was misunderstood by so many that they confused it with criticize. And so now it's the APS tells us that we have to say that this is the judge's feedback forum. If I'm the chief judge, I always introduce it as this is the judge's feedback forum, formerly known as the critique. Sorry, Prince.
But it's also it's a communications medium, and you, in a sense, are acting as the editors. How well did the exhibitor, how well did the author convey the information in a way that is believable and credible and easy and digestible?
Yeah, but peer review is not to tear something down. It's to help build it up before it gets exposed to the public.
And also, you would think that the other thing is that they may point out research or publications which the author has never come across, right? Especially if they're sort of dealing with something which is not in their own language.
Yeah.
In my case, I translate lots of things from Korean, but it doesn't mean I've actually found everything that's been written about a particular topic.
We've got a comment kind of related. Would a global digital philatelic library not be very useful to have a complete reference checking database? So that's a question from the audience. Of course, whether such a thing is possible is very difficult.
It's all a matter of the appropriateness of subject indexing in Philatelic, which is a completely impossible subject once you get beyond postage stamps or revenue stamps with the name of a country, a date, a value, this sort of thing. Once you get into postal history subjects, it's almost impossible to do, which really is indicating that people should not be in too much of a hurry to complete their works. They must spend time in finding things and talking to people.
There is there is more and more information available daily online. I know when I was doing a census of one particular thing, I found the digitized 1860s publication from a very small area up in the middle of nowhere in Canada as a primary source. Those were people who were there writing about what was going on, 4 houses away. So that's all become available. Even with that, the census I generated was obsolete 3 hours after it was published. Because somebody who I did not know had any material sent me an example. So as great as the background research was, it was, there's always more. Yes, we also have to be careful of what we were talking about in terms of the wrong information getting scraped and stored in those online databases and becoming the gospel. So yeah, the more that's available, the better. There are half a dozen philatelic libraries in the English-speaking countries. Canada, the US has 3 or 4. Great Britain has, a number of them. They're out there. The material, at least in this language, is out there. Other languages likewise. We just have to make sure that what goes into it is relatively right for the time period it's written. It's vetted when it's used by somebody else, and it's made available to future researchers.
All right. Well, we've been almost an hour and a half. Is there anything big you really feel that we missed?
There's actually one thing, a comment just came in about copyright holders. It's interesting. We do not copyright the Chronicle of the USPCS.
Well, in most countries, the mere creation of something that's original is copyrighted automatically. So whether it says that or not,
but
and this has to be very carefully looked at, especially at the moment. I write copyright on everything I write as a matter of principle. That's my starting position. But are usually very pleased for other people to publish it if they ask.
And in sense, that's where, you know, we are of the belief that this information should be out there. It's true, we keep some of the most recent issues behind our membership paywall, but I do not believe we've ever turned down any request for anybody to publish any or all of the articles that are in our publication.
Yeah. Same with the London Philatelist.
Mhm.
The author obviously retains the intellectual property, but yeah, I'm not aware of any refusal to allow republication. Just ask, as David said, just ask. You know.
I think the key thing here is that the style of presenting information and the form of words and the typography of the page may be copyright, but there's no copyright in facts.
True.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to our viewers. As I said before, we'll be putting a recording of this roundtable up on YouTube on the APS YouTube page, and we will also be publishing essentially a report in the Philatelic Literature Review, which is going to be coming out in its new revised form late April, early May. So I'm very excited for this to be the first roundtable, like proper discussion in the PLR. Also, if any of you thought of anything, or any of the viewers thought of anything that you think would be an interesting sidebar or further commentary, but yeah, please just reach out and let me know about it. My email address is editor@stamps.org. All right, yes, thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.